Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing Stand Up by Jethro Tull. Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog. I guess we're just getting lucky because I think this is the second time this month that we are reviewing Jethro Tull's music, so hopefully this one will please you all because I'm really happy to make these videos about this amazing band. But anyway, here's some of my favorite bits from this album. So, third time's the charm. Welcome back everybody to the third time we're reviewing one of the greatest prog bands of all time. They're still making music even in 2022. They are of course the infamous Ian Anderson's Jethro Tull. But wait, because today's album might actually not be considered an Ian Anderson Jethro Tull and could still be looked at a time where the band was actually led by all of its members. Because you see, today we are reviewing the second album by Jethro Tull called Stand Up, and it's quite conveniently coming right after we reviewed their first album called This Was. You see, their first album This Was actually mainly led by two people, being Ian Anderson himself but also vocalist and guitarist Mick Abrams. Now the two of them got into some creative disagreements in which Abrams left the band after the release of their debut album. And while Abrams would go on to join a group called Baldwin Pig, Ian Anderson and the rest of the band would go on to explore a much more interesting direction of proto-prog, which is of course in hindsight what we call it, but back in the day they would just experiment with rock music and folk inspirations. And what I really like about today's album is how slightly and very nonchalantly it shifts a bit from the blues rock that was featured in last album to something that is a bit more experimental and progressive that would later become the progressive rock sound that we would hear from Jethro Tull in albums like Aqualung, Thick as a Brick, and whatever came after it. And this minute shift is actually really felt, with a lot of the songs found on this album actually feeling like some sort of precursors to songs you'll find on Aqualung. For example, Look Into the Sun feels like the spiritual precursor to a song like Wandering Aloud, and the rough approach of A New Day Yesterday actually feels like some sort of proto-locomotive breath. And if I really want to stretch it, the song We Used to Know actually has some hints of what would later be found on a song like Hymn 43. So despite this album showing many strong signs of straight blues and rock music, it is undoubtedly going in the right direction artistically and showing a very big potential to something grander that would come in the future. And this sense of anticipation throughout the album is really something that I much enjoyed and I really liked about it, and as a standalone album this one also sounds really good even if you don't consider what came before and what will come after it. And despite no single song on here really being progressive to the core, I do think that the music on here is really enjoyable, with some songs even being my personal favorites, with some songs even showing some progressive hints in them, which I personally really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the flute playing on here, but unlike the last album, I actually enjoyed the flute playing by Ian Anderson, but also by the newly introduced Martin Barre, which actually plays a more classically trained type of flute and is actually found on 2 separate tracks on here called Jeffrey Goes to Lancaster Square and Reasons for Waiting. And speaking about Reasons for Waiting, this song just completely caught me off guard when suddenly in the middle it introduced a full-on orchestra with stringed instruments, which I really enjoyed, and I never in a million years expected it to be featured this late in the album, but apparently it did, and it was very blessed. And honestly, it took this song from the status of fine to the status of divine. But this isn't the best song on this entire album. Let me not beat over the bush anymore and tell you all what my favorite track from this album actually is. You can't miss it. It's amazing. It's a fantastic song. It has no lyrics, it doesn't need no lyrics, and of course it's simply titled Bure. This track is of course inspired by JS Bach's melody of the same name, and despite giving it a more rockier and jazzy approach and quite far straying from the original, it does somehow still hold true to the original as well and pay some sort of nice tribute to it. Now this is a song that I've known for years now, and I actually didn't know that it came off this album in particular, but I really like this one, like on a godly level. I think this is my all-time favorite short track from Jethro Tull. Of course I'm saying short track because thick as a brick, but anyway, I love this one to bits. And when I made the favorite bits for this album, I actually put 2 favorite bits from this one, but in all honesty, every single freaking moment from this track has to be a favorite bit of mine. But despite me loving this one more than anything else from the discography of Jethro Tull, I don't think that it's fair that I choose this one to be my favorite and be featured on the favorites playlist, because I really don't want this one to be featured yet again if I already know and I know that I love it. It is already in my playlist of my top songs of all time, so it really doesn't have to go here. So with a broken heart, I decided to dismiss this one and choose another song which I really loved from this album, which isn't of course as perfect as Bure but kinda close, and that's of course Look Into the Sun. I particularly enjoyed how this song was led mostly by Ian Anderson himself with his vocals, piano playing and guitar, with of course Martin Barre and his slight electric guitar flourishes in the background, as well as Glenn Cornick's bass, which adds a very nice depth to the entire sound, and of course Clive Bunker, who's just kinda sitting there and doing nothing because there's no drums or percussion in this entire song, and he's just waiting for them to move on to the next track so he can get back to playing. Poor Clive. And then this album comes to an end with the last song called For 1,000 Mothers, which is a nice song but definitely quite disappointing, because at the midpoint it actually comes to a halt, like a finish, which is really lovely sudden finish to the album, but then suddenly it just comes back in and plays for another minute and then goes out in a fade out, which make it a whole lot more disappointing. But yeah, if I actually had to summarize this album, I would have to say that this is one step up from This Was. The band are gradually starting to realize their own unique sound, and they're gonna define progressive rock forever in just 2 short years with their album Aqualung, and change the game forever a year after that with Thick as a Brick. So I actually really like it that this album isn't some sort of breakthrough, it's just more of a realization album that would probably go on to show in their next album, maybe not, who knows, I actually do hope that it will. Maybe the next album will be some sort of regression, but I really don't see that happening. But all in all, I will have to wholeheartedly say that I have enjoyed this album and that I do think that I will come back to it in time soon. Such a cool cover. There is so much things that you can do with line work, and this cover just goes to emphasize that. The fact is, this album cover only has 2 colors on it. It has the base yellow and it has the black. And personally, as someone that really likes drawing with lines and pens, I can wholeheartedly appreciate such a cover like this and the depth that it actually goes into. And it seems like Jethro Tull do have a knack of showing the band members on their covers, and I actually get that, but I really like the fact that they never just go for the simple band photograph and instead go for something more creative, like with their last album with the absurd imagery, their costumes and everything that had to do with it, or like this album that actually has them them drawn on it, which also looks pretty cool. And I really like the fact that they're not drawn true to life, but actually as some sort of caricatures that actually express a lot about what they are, and it shows their imperfections as well as their transitional stage between being sort of hippies to medieval gestures to being quite modern. And this image would actually go on to show them really well on their stage performances, in which they would show off their imperfections, they would show off their ugly sides, and I really love that, and that's a part of what makes seeing Jethro Tull live, at least back in those days, a really special experience. So as I said, this album is a step up from This Was, and if you remember, I gave This Was a rating of 7 out of 10, so this one understandably receives a rating of 8 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to The Loused in the Comatorium, the first album by the well-known band the Mars Volta. I of course want to thank my lovely supporter over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum, you are the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.